What's up, everybody? This is CJ Johnson, joined by Enrico Moses. Welcome to another episode of People in Power. Yes, we're filming this. We're finally filming this. We're evolving. We're changing. We're trying to grow.
Yes.
Week after week, episode after episode. Yes, we've been getting more of your questions in. Yes, our viewership is getting incrementally higher. We're understanding how this is all working a little bit more. And this is the next step for us. We wanted to videotape our podcast. So here we are.
Got us live in the flesh. We're not live, but in the flesh. Y'all can see us now. You know what I mean?
That's right.
So CJ, we wanted to kick in and talk about the big school walkout that happened today.
National walkout, students protesting gun violence in the nation. All around the nation, there's been walkouts and protests, peaceful protests. And I couldn't be more proud of this new generation that's emerging.
I feel the same way. I feel like they understand the power that they do have and the power that we all have, and to unify and to use our voice to get the attention of the politicians that at this point it's kind of clear that they don't care what the citizens want.
Absolutely. Yeah, you know, it's something that like made me a little bit jealous and envious of this generation because when I was younger, like we always talked about, we learned about all these about protests and fighting for your right, but there was the way that society evolved and the war in Iraq, all these situations that were happening, the protests, the 99%, like those protests, it seemed like it was aimless for a little bit. And I'd say in recent years, the Women's March, obviously, Black civil rights, different movements and marches going on have really transcended and changed and evolved what we see protests on. And now we're seeing a young generation, a generation of kids, teenagers that are supposed to be lazy, entitled, selfie obsessed, social media obsessed, and they're walking out to not protest like bullshit, but gun violence. This issue that we've been debating about
forever,
since before you and I were even in the fucking picture.
Right. Yeah, I think it's amazing, and it really shows the paradigm shift that we're all experiencing when it comes to this new digital age.
Absolutely.
I think that the kids understand that they have a platform. You know, they understand that if they use that platform in an organized and in a strategic manner, that things will happen. And that was something that I don't feel like I had, you know, any understanding of, like, you know, how do we utilize some type of organization tool so that the whole country can get on the same page? I mean, it was almost impossible for us.
You know, it's funny that you say that, right? Because when we talk about technology and how it's evolved and how it's changed over time, and when we were young, you know, that's when we were experiencing the internet and social media, and it's all brand new, and nobody really knew what it was supposed to be used for. It was used for like entertainment and catching up with people, and then it evolved into this thing of like, hey, I get to express myself in an anonymous fashion. So people feel much more comfortable about expressing themselves with that blanket, that comfort of like anonymity.
Right, being an emoji.
In an emoji and all sorts of social handles and all sorts of bullshit. And what we're seeing now is the evolution of social media, the evolution of the social impact by children taking ownership of things. And what you're saying with that paradigm shift, let's all understand and take into account that the accessibility to knowledge is there now, like it wasn't before. And you can see that with this emerging generation of like, no, like this is bullshit. Like we do care about the future. Yeah, we care about the environment. Yeah, we care about the gun violence. We don't believe in the guy that's the president. He doesn't speak for me. We're seeing that in the young generation that's about to mobilize and vote in a few years. We're seeing that, and we're seeing something very special.
So where do you think this all leads to?
What we're seeing this sort of evolve into is that we're seeing that like we as a whole as a society, we're being much more socially conscious about all sorts of issues that may have been up for debate, maybe issues that we sort of like, I don't want to say swept under the rug, but when we used to be taught when you at the dinner table, don't talk about politics, don't talk about this, don't talk about that. Now it's a part of the normal conversation. Now people are much more educated. People can find information so much faster now. And because of that, what we are going to be seeing more of is we're going to be seeing more protests. We're going to see more organizations. We're going to see more people speaking out, not just hiding behind the anonymity of social media and the internet. We're going to see people really get out there and be active and proactive, mobilizing through social media, but being proactive in real life.
Yeah, I totally see that happening, and I've experienced myself just the introduction of the cell phone has, as a man of color, has completely shifted my look at like how the world reacts to me. And if something is to happen to me where I feel wrong, I know that I now have this tool that I can pull out and I can start recording what is happening. And for me, I just think that alone has created such a big dynamic. Like we've seen it with the Black Lives Matter movement. I think that's exactly where that comes from. I think the ability for these students to tweet what they're doing, to connect with their phone, I just see that there is such a kind of a new wave that's coming in that I judge that the older generation has been saying, the youth, they're always looking at their phone.
Right.
They're always on social media.
Absolutely.
And there's this other part of that dynamic that is about what you're saying, mobilizing,
absolutely,
organizing,
absolutely,
standing up for something that many people already agree with.
It's funny. Okay, so you saying that, just to piggyback on that a little bit, something that's very interesting about all of this is that change is supposed to happen. Things are supposed to evolve and change. And yes, maybe the youth, when we were younger, maybe we didn't give a fuck. Maybe that's true. Maybe we should have given more of a fuck than we did. Maybe we didn't have the tools that kids have now. And kids have those tools, and they're deciding now to use that for proactive social issues. They're using that to talk about real things and do real things. So if an older generation or somebody that's against this sort of movement, protests, people speaking out about liberal agendas, quote unquote, you have to do some some real soul searching here, because you can't have it both ways of like, oh, the younger generation, they don't give a shit, they're lazy, and then at the same time they do give a shit, like, where are their manners?
Right.
Where'd that come from?
Right. And I think that we're seeing that almost as like a defense mechanism.
Absolutely.
Because the way I see it with the whole fake news movement, I believe that, like, I don't even believe that 100%. That the older generation, what they're trying to tell us is that we were receiving fake news and we were tricked, and because we were tricked, we decided to vote for Donald Trump. I don't buy that. What I think is really happening is that is a narrative that people are saying, well, I just didn't know any better, so I voted for the racist, xenophobic guy, and so that's all. And it's like, I told us to come with our bibliography and to not trust what's on the internet. So all of a sudden, y'all forgot what y'all been teaching us.
Absolutely.
So I don't really buy that. I buy that the old paradigm doesn't understand social media.
Absolutely.
Doesn't understand how technology can be leveraged to real world experiences, and how that's actually what's going on right now in the undercurrent of, the Instagram and all the likes and all of that.
I mean, it's a natural evolution of things. Yeah, of course you can look at things on the surface, right? And you can look at Instagram and you can see some kids taking photos of their food, taking photos of themselves, selfies. We are all guilty of that, all of us, all generations. And I think it's very easy to say, oh, that's narcissistic. Like, oh, they only care about themselves. And then when you see that that's not necessarily the truth, if anything, with like statistics and science has shown that the younger generations care a lot more. And they're a lot more aware. And they're challenging things, and they're challenging things with facts. They're challenging things with emotion as well, but facts. And you can't challenge that. That's not fake news. That's the reality of it.
Right. Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And I think that, that's a big part of why we do this podcast, this video, is to continue to share what we've experienced, to shed light on some of the things that are happening in the zeitgeist. And yeah, I think that right now, there's such a big shift when it comes to, how people are employed, how people make money. How do they put their opinion out in the world? I think we all saw when, the election was happening, this big divide in our country through social media. And so what I'm really, excited to share with you and to kind of dive into is just, what are some of the ways that our audience can tap into the tools and the new era that's really coming in, where there's going to be less jobs, right? There's going to be more self-employment, right? There's going to be a lot more, I look at personal growth going on, whether it's yoga or, wellness or meditation. I think that is where a lot of the business is expanding. And so just kind of what are some things that you think about as far as working with clients as a business owner, as someone who works with a bunch of different clients from all different sectors? What are some tools or tips that you have for our audience as far as how to create the right partnership and create something that's mutually beneficial?
Absolutely. I'd say one of the top lessons that I've learned is to absolutely make sure that you have effective communication with all parties. Don't assume things. Don't go the extra mile thinking that you might get something out of that. You need to be very clear about what you are willing to do and what you can do in the beginning when you're developing these relationships, and make sure that you're respectful. Make sure that you care a lot. In saying that, and saying what you're saying, I've dealt with so many different industries and so many different situations. I would say from the influencer marketing side of things, what I was seeing emerging from the younger workforce that's trying to live the dream and, hey, I want to get paid to go travel around the world and do all that. So how do I do that as a photographer or a filmmaker and all that?
Right.
And what we see a lot happen is a lot of these influencers will go to work with different brands or marketing and PR agencies and try to do these one-off projects. And they don't actually try to cultivate these relationships. And that's something that you always have to understand, is that this is all about relationships, right? And showing your value. And when you show your value, you don't have to ever overextend yourself. You don't ever have to undervalue yourself.
Right.
You just need to know what your value is and share that with whomever you're working with.
I think those are such key points. And when it comes to cultivating your value, what are some tips that you have for understanding how to do that and then going after that?
Sure. So first of all, you absolutely need to understand what your goal is, career-wise and personal-wise. I always ask that to everybody, what is it that you want out of life? What is it that you want out of your career? Once you understand what that is, sort of strategize and brainstorm, outline different ways that you can make that a reality. And when you are a self-starter, an entrepreneur, your own business owner, and you're trying to put out a brand or a business, or maybe you want to be a creative and you want to get business from a specific place, you need to really understand how to start pitching yourself the correct way. Right. This is what I'm good at. This is what my skill set is, and this is what I can bring to the table. You have to be very humble in the beginning. You have to take on free projects. You got to do a little bit extra, not a lot. Right. If you feel like you're being taken advantage of, that's the perfect opportunity. Opportunity, key word. Not a reason to get angry, not a reason to get upset, not a reason to be like, oh my God, they're running ragged, they're taking advantage of me, what do I do, what do I say? That's the perfect opportunity to revisit and renegotiate the terms of this relationship that you have and utilize the skill set that you have to your advantage. For example, you and I were talking off camera about a situation where you're a jack of all trades, you do so many different things, and then you offer to do one scope of service out of the kindness of your heart, hoping to grow that relationship, that they would see you're doing a little bit extra. Everybody does that. See you doing a little bit extra, and they want to maybe chip you off a little bit more, give you a little more business. Everybody does that. That's not wrong. That's a great way to think. when it gets to the point where you see that, you know what, they're actually taking it a lot more, and I don't think that this is going to go the way that I think it is. Perfect opportunity to tell that person, tell that entity, group, whatever, during a meeting, during a phone call, hey, I would love to do this, but we have to revisit this. You have to set boundaries and just do it respectfully and understand that that's an opportunity to do more or to get more.
Right.
And when you understand that, the sky's the limit.
I love that. And just when you're talking about opportunity, right? I think that that's so key of a mentality to have as a creative who's, whether you're getting started, whether you're a multi-millionaire, thinking about relationships as far as opportunity and from a win-win perspective.
Absolutely.
Right?
Yeah, I always look at it with win-win. I never look at it with, if it's win-lose, then I'm not thinking hard enough about the situation.
Totally. And I think that, looking at, we have opportunities and then we have assets, right? And when it comes to like what you were saying, it's like finding our value, it's like defining our assets, right? It's like helping the people we work with understand what we bring to the table. So the more we cultivate what assets we have, the more we can show up and be like, here are the opportunities that we can create through my assets and your assets.
Yeah, and I mean, we live in, listen, the world is moving very quickly, and everybody's trying to get something. And we all have our own personal issues or day-to-day that is outside of whatever relationships that you have that are working relationships. So you have to take all of that into account. And the reason why I say that is because most of us, not most of us, but it's in human nature for us to be a little bit selfish, right? To look out for ourselves first. So sometimes we assume that somebody sees all the hard work you're doing. And what do you do in that case? Do you clam up and you're quiet? Do you get a little bit arrogant and be like, hey, I've done this, I do this, I do that? You have to find this nice balance of understanding that, like, there's no harm in that. You just need to figure out a way to showcase your talent, your assets, your skill set in a very respectful way, because sometimes people don't see it. I mean, just because you think it's obvious is not the case at all.
Right. And like you said earlier, it's being able to effectively communicate, right? What it is that you want, what it is you bring to the table. And for me, it's constantly retooling that narrative and that communication.
Absolutely. And I will say this is that, like, I hear a lot, like, from people that they're afraid to do an email or a text or a phone call because they're afraid they're going to overstep their boundaries or insult somebody or annoy somebody. I've also, talked to people that don't give a shit and they do the complete opposite. Relationships that you have. Right. And you also have to understand that if you don't say anything, you're never going to know. Right. And just because you say something, you can say it in a very respectful way, or do something in a very respectful way.
Right. And I think, closed mouths don't get fed.
Right.
Coming to the table with respect. I think these are such key components that I do think get lost sometimes.
Absolutely.
We're
in a rhythm now where we don't necessarily feel as comfortable speaking in real life with one another because we're so used to being on our phones or being behind a computer screen, talking via social media. So when we are engaging with one another, sometimes we have diarrhea of the mouth, or we don't say as much as we probably should. And you have to understand that, like, the whole point of living is to have human interaction. So you really do need to be a much more effective communicator. The more effective you are with being a communicator, the more success you're going to have, not just professionally, but personally.
Right. And I think that when it comes to communication, for me, it's been a long journey as far as understanding what are my self-limiting beliefs that I have, that we all have. Like, we all have some type of story that might not be the best story for us to be telling ourselves. Right. It could be about the way we look. It could be about our history. It could be about what we feel people think about us.
Absolutely.
So my communication and tooling my communication has been such a big part of me understanding first, well, what are some of my self-limiting beliefs? Because that unconsciously shows up in my communication.
What kind of self-limiting beliefs do you feel like you have in your communication?
So one of my self-limiting beliefs is around perfectionism. So wanting to be perfect and do things perfect, and so I think that the way that can show up when I'm communicating is it can come from that perspective, which as I've grown and learned more about myself and the world, I don't believe that. I know that's why I call it a shadow. There is no perfection. There's excellence. I know I can be excellent. I know my partners can be excellent, but there's no such thing as perfect, right? There's
Absolutely.
so many different ways to do so much. So that's one of the ways that if I'm in that shadow and I'm communicating with a partner, a potential client, I could say something that is along the lines of right and wrong, where maybe there isn't a right and wrong. There's this and that. And so that can offend somebody. That could make somebody feel like, oh, this person's arrogant. They have the right way and my way is the wrong way. So just being able to avoid some of those kind of dialogue issues that aren't real. Like, it's not that I'm here thinking that, oh, I think I'm better than you, but my unconscious behavior is now coming out. And that's why it's unconscious, because I'm not conscious of the fact that I'm insane.
There you go. That's what's up.
So, just being able to take the time, and a lot of it really, you do want support, right? It's like unconscious behavior. It's hard sometimes to find your own unconscious behavior. But if you have a buddy, or you have people who are tuned into these type of things, they can reach out to you and be like, hey, I noticed that you have a relationship with right and wrong. Have you ever taken a look at that? And being open to saying, you know what, like, I didn't really realize that I was doing that. And just to be able to take a step back. And so that's been super helpful for me, is having a team or a group of people that is constantly helping me uncover my unconscious behavior.
Do you like check in with them and ask them as well, or do they just like offer that up?
We've gotten to the point now where we understand each other enough where they can offer it up and I don't get offended.
Uh-huh.
But in the beginning of our relationships, it starts in a way where it's like, hey, are you open to something? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, and if they say yes, it's like, this is something I'm hearing you say.
So setting those boundaries early.
Exactly.
That's perfect. Yeah, that's smart.
And
yeah.
always doing that, because you never know. Like, you might be, trying to help your friend, and you're like, hey, man, like, you have unconscious. You're like, what the fuck? Like, nobody asked you that.
Yeah, and it's really funny because there's always, I think sometimes like some people can get in this nice rhythm of letting things build up to where it comes into an explosion, and they say things that aren't necessarily like the best way to articulate themselves. And you definitely, I think what you just said is a great tip to share, which is that you absolutely need to set expectations and boundaries in the beginning. You have to stick to that too, because people always test your boundaries and your expectations. That comes with partnerships, that comes with teams, clients, whatever you're doing. You absolutely have to, stick to your guns and be respectful.
It's so true. And what I've learned is that when people do test your boundaries, to not take it personally.
Right.
And that has taken time for me to learn. But I do think that's one of the most powerful ways of being creative, is understanding that we have to first set our boundaries, which means we have to even understand our own boundaries, which sometimes takes time. Like sometimes somebody steps on your boundary that you didn't even know you had.
So what happened was, allegedly Big Sean cheated on her. It was this big thing because then she unfollowed him on Twitter and Instagram. And, she's got all these like tattoos of him on her body.
On her body, big.
So people were going wild, just sending all sorts of crazy tweets. We all had a ball the other night on Twitter. And one of the things that was kind of funny was that, then she was like kind of coming out and saying that like none of that was true. And then obviously people were like, why'd you unfollow him, blah, blah, blah. And it just really comes to show what we were talking about was like relationships and like breakups and, that etiquette of like social media and the power of things. Because, we were
what
talking.
etiquette?
There is no etiquette. But, when you unfollow somebody and like people see that, or you block somebody, people see that, and they're like, yo, like, what's going on? But you don't say anything. You just, but like, it's like those actions speak louder than words.
Totally. And people are looking at you like, hey, I just noticed that that your profile went to it's complicated or some bullshit.
Yeah.
And you're just like, yeah.
Hey, just so your relationship status is not there anymore. Like it's just, what are you now? It's just, I don't see anything. Or like, hey, what happened to all those tagged photos? Like, you just gone.
Yeah.
And that's just that's a really weird
New
world
level,
that we're in.
new nuance to relationships. I mean, I remember I remember somebody saying to me like, "Hey, like, why didn't you change the relationship status earlier? Like, is there something wrong with me?" And I was just like, "No, like,
Wow.
no,
Wow.
there's nothing wrong with you. I just didn't do that."
Yeah, that's happened to me before. That was actually a really big deal in a relationship that I had. That,
See, it's a big deal, yo.
yeah, it's a huge deal. I didn't update the relationship status, but at the same token, I don't get on Facebook at all. I'm a heavy, and the problem is that I go heavy on social media. I'm this social media guru, quote unquote, and I don't update my relationship status.
Which seems a little suspect.
It's a little suspect, right? It's a little sketchy. For me, it was strictly out of laziness.
Right.
And when I remedied the situation, it was like a too little, too late sort of thing. But
Yeah.
it was really funny that was like a topic of conversation.
That will happen, and I guess what I would say as far as advice and tips is not everything needs to go on social media.
Absolutely.
I would say, like, rule number one, not everything needs to go on social media. You know, rule number two, it's like when you're thinking about writing something and you're in a relationship and it's about your relationship, I would say take a step back and wait at least a day to maybe a week to write that. You know, like, keep it, you know, in a notebook, and maybe you want to write it, but just don't do it when it's fresh, because I think that there's so many people that post emotionally, and we all get emotional, right? But we all know that things calm down after emotions rise.
Absolutely.
And you don't want something to be out there forever if it's really just something that might have happened this week, or something that we could easily resolve, or maybe it felt like it was a lot, but we're going to get over it. You know, this is, you know, how the world is going to view you, a relationship with like you and the world. So just being mindful, you know, so it's good to have maybe a therapist. You know, maybe that's where you should share your emotions, or a good friend that you trust, you know, and take the time before you put your emotions onto social media to realize that it has impacts maybe larger than just you feeling a little better in the moment, right? So that's about it. You know, that's what we got for y'all today. Just want to always show so much love and respect to all y'all, the viewers and listeners, for taking your time to share your whatever day it is with me and the homie CJ. You know, make sure that you hit us up online on the Twitter, the Instagram. I'm at Enrico Moses. CJ is at CJ Johnson Jr. And you already know, none but love and respect to y'all.
Peace.